All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Unslaved. Happy to be with you again. We're going to be debunking nihilism and some other things here today. So good to see you, Michael. How you been? And let's get started.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was, we talked a little bit about it before, but members had to wait while the schedule. This was going to schedule for a few weeks ago or whatever. So again, big thanks to members for waiting and putting up with that. But it's valid, across the board. Anything that could be said about this can be said about Western religion as well. Say we might focus today a little bit more on the Eastern side of things, but it's obvious that anything you could say about these kind of spiritual subjects, allegedly, or pseudo-mystical subjects, can be said across the board about other paradigms as well. And sure enough, that we can chat at the end and sort of bring up questions to summarize, but this has become important because this non-dualism doctrine is starting to spread. Lots of books have been written. These guys tend to be presenting themselves as one thing, when they really are another, because although they talk about the unreality of the world and the meaninglessness of knowledge, they all have websites, Telegram profiles and books galore. So it's, for the most unworldly people, there's already a little bit of a glitch there, but there's so much to be said about it. We did when we did the bigger planets a couple of weeks ago, I just threw in a couple of primers there, promising that we would maybe expand upon it and explore the subject at a future date. And, this is our opportunity to do that. But the thing is that never for a moment think of this non-dualism. There's so much can be said about it. We'll try to keep it nice and compact, but don't think of it as genuine mysticism. Especially if you're a newbie, you don't really know how to define that word. What's the difference between mysticism and theology, Hermeticism and Gnosticism, right? We're already, it's going to be quite vague. But even somebody who's been reading a long time on these subjects still, let's try to non-dualism, I'm afraid, doesn't match. We'll see in a minute that like Gnosticism, non-dualism has a lot of hermetic elements thrown in just to make it look like the shelves aren't completely bare. I'm saying that the thing is spurious and even dangerous, but of course, at a first glance, it sounds like there's a lot of doctrines from different branches and schools that are being mentioned, right? So, that's called the window display. But, a beginner might not know that. And as a matter of fact, that's kind of a key word, because they are beginners themselves. Anyone who subscribes to non-dualism, like I said, it's like mysticism for dummies. It's a really naive beginner's kind of outlook on these subjects. Like you've opened the wrong door and gone in, you thought you were attending one night class and you're sitting there, for about an hour before you realize, oh, I thought this was sociology. What are you guys talking about? Business or politics? I'm in the wrong class. But for a while you can be fooled. And so somebody who is maybe even has genuine interest in learning about, say, mysticism, mystical traditions, hermeticisms, gets into the room, of the non-dualists and sits there going, this is just brilliant, before you find out, watch out, this is totally not the real thing at all. But it's a pose. It would be naive people posing, as having wisdom, sounding profound. Is the danger there that, and it's an easy association. We've already talked before about, the similarities, not the differences between sage and psychopath. And I'll put the links below later to those kinds of interviews, those kinds of podcasts, because this sort of pertains. We're hovering around that. It's not that all non-dualists are clearly psychopathic, but we're not too far away from that, once you hone in, you get, yeah, okay, like, you start to discover. Once you get a little bit clever in prying open their theories, then you see it's rife with conceptual and verbal contradictions. This is the difficulty. And that's kind of typical of most Eastern paradigms and mystical practices anyway. I say mystical always in parentheses, right? In quotes. And the danger there, some may have already realized, is, look, you only need to speak in an Eastern accent. You just have to quote a couple of Sanskrit terms like moksha and samadhi and dharana and all of these things, and already it sounds holier than thou to the Western ear. And that is actually a danger, because it's been used against us for a long, long time. And before you penetrate the surface, there's nothing holy about Sanskrit in that sense, and it can often be manipulated to make it like that. To make it attractive to novices. And some of the concepts, not just the words, are attractive. You throw around talismanic terms like oneness, and you watch what happens. They come running from all parts of the world. But the more intelligent person goes, well, I think we've got a problem there, because there's no such thing as oneness. That doesn't even exist. So we're off to a kind of a bad start. And I would prefer that's where your mind is, not to get caught up in the whirlwind of their talismanic terms. The real mysticism lies somewhere else, so to speak. But of course, we know from looking at the New Age movement and that these terms like oneness have a tremendous hypnotic power over the mind. I call it mysterium. Mysterium, singular, mysteria, is part of the whole concept of how we lose ourselves in ideas about ideas. Ideas are often not real. They can give rise to real things, but they can also just remain ideas that are based on other ideas, none of it rooted in any kind of legitimate reality, actually. This is, of course, a huge problem, both East and West. And the mysteria will eventually, if it's not caught at a given point, will lead to very unnatural ends. The bad thing being that you might not be able to turn back. Once you've reached the end, you have to go all the way once you're committed. And I think that non-dualism is just but one. Most of religion is that. You don't know, somebody's promising you salvation. How do you know anything about the person who's promising you that? How do you know anything about the path? Have you studied it? Do you know where those ideas even come from? Where mystical ideas come from and why they come? Why Gnosticism exists, or Christianity or Judaism or any of it? Now, like most Indian Eastern teachings, though, it's really a bunch of it's like a madcap mix of many schools. So as you discover and you go very patiently, you go, oh, wait a minute, these ideas, like an engine in a car, they're all separate inventions from completely different worlds, invented by completely different inventors, whatever, and then they're brought together in this kind of big hodgepodge. And so the Westerner doesn't really think about that. A lot of the junk that's been sold to us by the East is still being accepted today. These versions of Buddhism, Buddhism has changed in the thousands of years more than anybody. Around the 7th century, the thing that was nearly, completely recast, and then again, and then again. And so they've changed their own teachings time after time after time, and some of them are very, very key. They're the very essence of Buddhism have changed. Yet we have this idea that it's carved out of stone and it's been there forever, and this kind of thing. So many mystical traditions will be found within non-dualistic teachings. We'll look at a few of them and address that as we go. But the thing is that they're like ideas that are then readapted in a kind of an odd way. And there's great consequences for doing that. When you go to another school, say, I like that thing about time, or I like that thing about reincarnation, or I like that thing about karma. And then everybody grabs these teachings and then adapts it. Think of we've already mentioned Gnosticism. You'll find big dollops of Gnosticism in non-dualism. They've appropriated, but Gnosticism is highly dualist. The higher pure world of the pleroma and spirit and the lower world of El de Beof, the demiurge, you know, and the female principle and all. Look, Gnosticism has dualism written all over it, yet you'll find heavy doses of Gnosticism and non-dualism. It's like, why? Well, because it's just appropriate. Oh, come on in, back it up, come on in, we'll deal with it later. In you come. And then, you know, every day there's trucks rolling up to unload all these different paradigms. And it can be as confusing as hell, and maybe is even meant to be confusing. Gnosticism, we won't really go into it in depth because we've done it. I've done it in other shows. But safe to say that if you took the principles of Gnosticism and you add them to the principles of non-dualism, wow, you've got something, you know, pretty incendiary there, pretty dangerous, something to really watch out for, because these are two things that really should, you know, watch, don't join the wires. You know, there's something there that could really have a tremendous negative significance for our world today, given the state of the teens, and even far more intelligent people are buying into these philosophies, you know. Another thing that they clearly show, if you were to watch them assiduously and study them, is the general non-interest in actual psychology. Now, this is, of course, part of my indictment of pretty much everyone in society and every school. The total disinterest in even the basic Freudian, basic aspects of psychology. Well, you find this in non-dualism as well. In fact, these non-dualists rarely ever even use the word psychology, and that's a red flag. You know, that they seem to be, that seems to plague. Again, it takes time though for one to spot that, because society leaves it out, churches leave it out, right? New Age movement really kind of leaves it out. So you don't notice that it's being left out, because it is left out by everyone. So if you went to study the non-dualists and listen assiduously to what they say, as I've done for decades, you wouldn't notice what's missing unless you're very, very sharp and onto it, right? But India, since a great deal of the non-dualistic beliefs stem from India, it would help us to realize that there's more delirious shit that has come forth from India when it comes to Eastern paths than anyone could ever believe. More charlatans, more false doctrines than any other place in the planet. They've produced more infantile jive than anywhere. So much of it that it takes almost a lifetime to go through it and to ask about its etiology. Where do these teachings come from? There's, you know, Raja Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Hatha Yoga, and on it goes. I've listed them in the article Stilling the Mind. I can put that link below. But if you were to pick any of those, Karma Yoga and Jnana Yoga, and ask, where does it all come from? You know, you have to follow all of those things. There's going to be legitimate answers. You know, where do the Vedas come from? Where do the Upanishads come from? These are holy books of India. Where do they come from? And that's not by any means an easy road to take, any more than it would be with the history of any place. But it's more important to ask about these, because people are picking up practices that are very, very ancient. They come from a different time, a different world, a different thought pattern, a different relationship with our planet. And we're sitting there, you know, in our plush homes in San Diego and all of this, you know, with our shawls and our candles, rolling beads, and pretending that we have the same understanding of people who lived in ancient times on the banks of the Ganges. Don't you think there's something wrong with that picture as well? And the lack of psychology includes the lack of intention. The question of intention: why am I doing this? Why do I want to pick up any rite or practice from the East? What is my intention in seeking salvation itself? You see, when you scan this movement, you never find any. You find intention completely set aside. And yet that's not good, because intention is subsumed under morality. So, like, say in the non-dualist case, why are you pursuing this particular doctrine? Don't you know that it has moral components? For instance, don't criminals want to hide under a psychopath? You know, psychopaths and criminals want to hide under a particular image that maybe is the very reverse of the way that they really are on purpose. Like we have found out by looking at the, the actions and